Welcome back, everybody. Today is going to be a big day because we're going to talk about everyone's favorite topic, the news media. In this lecture, we're going to discuss the history of the media, the evolution from pamphlets being passed around in days of yore, all the way to cable news to electronic mail and the Twitter, and finally relations between the media and politicians and how that relationship affects the news we consume. So, what exactly are the news media? Well, the textbook definition is that they are any organization that gathers, packages, and transmits news through some proprietary communications technology. If you gather information about current events and send it to people in some sort of exclusive way, you are part of the media. For a long time, this was an exclusive club filled with only people who were employed by official media organizations. If you worked for the New York Times or CBS News or whatever other company, you were a part of the media. If you didn't, you weren't. However, we know this has changed recently. We have bloggers who are part of a one-person enterprise, freelancers who syndicate their work across a number of websites, offshoots of major organizations run by a few people, people on Twitter, social media, etc., and any number of other non-traditional media types. Are these people part of the media? Do First Amendment rights apply to them? What about something like the National Enquirer? What about the WikiLeaks people? Are they part of the press, and are they protected by the First Amendment? Why is the New York Times and other media sources protected by the First Amendment when they print material from WikiLeaks, but someone like Jonathan Snowden is not? These are increasingly complicated questions in the new, splintered media environment. Before we get into the history of the media, though, it's also important to note that media sources are developed primarily as private business enterprises uncontrolled by the government. The fact that they are private business enterprises with very little regulation on their content means that they are pretty much free to report on whatever they want. And this is largely governed by the profit motive, or the idea that media organizations are trying to maximize the amount of money they make. We'll talk about this more later, but this is why the media can tend to focus on the latest from the Kardashians or the Justin Bieber. However, we do still see news organizations attempting to balance this profit motive with providing necessary information to the general population. So, starting from the beginning, a very good place to start. Back in colonial times, publishing was an extremely expensive task. Every single unit you produced had a high cost, and that cost had to be passed on to the customer. Combining this with the fact that much of the population couldn't read, this limited the distribution range of the papers that existed in the beginning. Also, printing the paper itself was a time-consuming, labor-intensive process. Every page had to be composed in reverse from individual pieces of metal type. And the act of actually printing a single impression or sheet of paper with a wooden, hand-cranked press required 13 separate steps. But despite these challenges, by the mid-1770s, approximately 25 weekly newspapers were around to serve the colonies. As I mentioned in a previous lecture, the pamphlet was actually the most popular means of communicating because it was reusable, shareable, and durable. Single copies could be passed along to friends, family, etc., and many of your top writers, thinkers, philosophers were using this as a way of sharing their information. This is how ideas like Thomas Paine's Common Sense were distributed among the colonies.